So this is yet another example of a media organization that's so up to its you-know-what and you-know-what that it doesn't even see just how wrong it was what they did. And now it may cost them more than $1 billion. More than $1 billion. In fact, the BBC purposely slandered the president by stitching together a video about January 6th to make it look like he was inciting violence.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and I'll be there with you. And we fight. We fight like hell. We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women.
Well, here's fact. This is not the first time this so-called reputable news organization, BBC, has showed bias or got it completely wrong. Well, here's another fact. No organization would be brazen enough to slander the president of the United States with that much confidence unless it were a part of their DNA to have a clear-cut agenda, which we know they do. And we've seen some awful editing gaffes recently. CBS comes to mind with that edit of Kamala Harris interview in order to make her look, well, less Commie Harris. But this one, the BBC January 6th edit, it takes the cake. So much so that the head of the BBC resigned. Tim Davie, the BBC's director general and face of that catastrophic editorial decision, had little choice other than to quit, and neither did the head of the BBC's news division, Deborah Turnus. Incredible, though, that Turnus still had the guts to say this on her way out as the door hit her on the backside.
I stepped down over the weekend because the buck stops with me. But I'd like to make one thing very clear. BBC News is not institutionally biased. That's why it's the world's most trusted news provider.
Well, actually, it is. It really is. Talk about delusions. No bias, really. Not institutional bias, the definition of it, actually. Most trusted? Are you kidding me? Are you serious? I would say the only most the BBC will be when President Trump is done with them is mostly broke. What's worse is these people were warned, and they didn't care. The Telegraph newspaper got hold of a memo in which Michael Prescott, a former advisor to the BBC, warned them against such obvious politically motivated hoaxes. They chose to do it anyway. They actively chose to splice together two snippets of the president on January 6th from speeches given an hour apart in order to make it look like he was telling his supporters to storm the Capitol. It's even worse. Within that same documentary, which, by the way, that's what the BBC did it recently. They did it in a documentary. Trump caught wind of it and he said, I'm suing you for $1 billion. So within that same documentary, however, they showed the Proud Boys marching to Capitol Hill after it aired that fake spliced Trump speech as if they were heading there to answer the president's call. This is so much worse than just your run-of-the-mill media bias, folks. This is as far from reality as it gets. It's comical. It's almost fiction. Stuff that would make Orwell, even Stalin, blush just a little bit. Thing is, as shocking as this kind of stuff is, not exactly surprising coming from a news organization that allowed this to be said on air.
Now, transgender woman's milk is just as good for babies as breast milk. That's according to a letter from the medical director at University Hospital Sussex NHS Foundation Trust. The claim was made as part of a response against campaign groups. The trust referred to studies and the World Health Organization guidance, including one case which found what it called no observable effects in babies fed by induced lactation.
She was trying to say babies fed with men's breast milk aren't worse off than what? Things like that don't exactly help their credibility, if you know what I mean. And what about the constant bias towards Hamas, a terrorist organization, over Israel? Not just that, but they've been forced to correct 2 stories per week on average since the October 7th Hamas terror attack. Was that a year and a half ago, 2 years ago? When your senior international editor has, quote, no regrets about putting out dangerous misinformation, you've got far deeper problems than ever imagined. Or when they continue to use a reporter who calls for Jews to be burned like Hitler did, kind of shows you what you need to know about the BBC, doesn't it? What they did to the president wasn't a fluke. It was pure leftist agenda-driven crap disguised as media with prestige. And the thing is, the BBC is publicly owned. Does that sound familiar? Think PBS, NPR. We know full well about all that. But get this, the BBC is a public broadcaster in a way that would shock Americans. In England, Any household that watches live television, even if they never turn on the channel that the BBC is aired on, must pay an annual television tax, the equivalent of around $225 for a licensing fee a year. And if they don't pay it, they'll face a fine of $1,300. It's crazy, right? That tax gets the BBC about $5 billion in annual revenue. They have no choice but to fund that level of bias over there. It's insane. For years, the BBC has been brushing this stuff under the carpet. BBC pulling out the same playbook, hoping that when the dust settles, it'll be back to business as usual. Sad truth is, it's probably right. You never know. Media bias lives its ugly life over there and over here. But you know what it is? It's Trump derangement syndrome. They got a bad case of it over there as well. We'll be back 2.5 minutes.